Thank you. Councillor Bowden. Councillor Butt, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm slightly confused procedurally because we were first told that Councillor Bowden made a statement and no one else would be able to speak. I challenged that, and very kindly, Madam Mayor, you said that we could make statements for 2 minutes, but we could not ask questions. And lo and behold, tonight, Councillor Buckley comes along and asks a question. So before I start on my 2-minute speech, a rhetorical question to Councillor Buckley. Have you read the Together Energy Update, which was the Part 2 paper to the Cabinet on the 11th of October? Because it would have answered all of your questions. Have you read the Cabinet, the Capital Investment Statement that was not a Part 2 item, it was a Part 1 item in March to the whole of the Council? Or was every question asked by the opposition is already there in the public domain or available on a need-to-know basis if you ask for it? Now, I was told I'd only have 2 minutes. I hope I have a little advice that's not included. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really wish we weren't here tonight. I wish the advice from my group that investing in Together Energy is too risky had been heeded. I wish that despite our warnings, Together had not collapsed. A collapse triggered in part, at least, by irresponsible meddling in the energy market by the Conservative government. And there I agree with Councillor Bowden. While the Conservative group and the MP for Warrington South push out what is expected to be a worst-case scenario, as Councillor Bowden said, the administration are trying to protect customers, creditors, including the residents of Warrington, and they need to be left to complete their work without additional pressure. But what I'm most upset about is the behaviour of the Conservative group in calling this meeting before the outcome for Together is known. And that just comes down to a basic sense of fairness and decency that would have held this action up until the administrators reported. But no, the Conservative motions are all predicated on the worst possible outcome before it's known. So, we come to the leader. He and his Office of Investment Strategy may prove to be defensible, but they've failed to defend it adequately despite requesting them to do so for over 2 years. He's allowed a narrative led by social media to paint what is almost certainly a totally false picture of Warrington's investments. He's also allowed the myth of the so-called Warrington debt to be believed throughout Warrington. He personally, sadly, is no longer believed. He has allowed Warrington's reputation as a well-run council to be destroyed in parts of the national press, taking their lead and no doubt informed and encouraged by our Conservative group and their social media friends. For the Conservatives to tarnish the town's reputation unfairly, simply for perceived political advantage, is unconscionable, as is the leader's failure to counter this adequately. That's why we're here tonight. We do not see, however our investment position turns out, that this situation can be rectified if Councillor Bowden remains as leader. My group calls on him to resign. Will you do so?
Councillor Beaver, please.
I was told I could ask a question, couldn't ask a question, so I thought that was a reasonable question.
Okay, well, that's no problem, thanks.
Councillor Beaver, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillor. Why does it have to be cutting spending or the current investment strategy? It's not a black and white situation, so let's not treat it as one. Do you agree we should review the strategy and focus on asset-based investments? Thank you.
Councillor Bowden, would you like to reply to that?
I didn't. Was there actually a question there, Councillor?
Yeah.
I was going to pick it up, so I can repeat it.
Basically, to sum it up, do you agree we should review the strategy and focus on asset-based investments rather than brokerages and the like?
The Council's investment strategy, as Councillor Heaton hopefully appreciates, is reviewed on a regular basis. It comes before Council as part of the capital programme at the budget meeting. And so that's the opportunity members have to comment on the investment strategy. Of course, it's apparent the investment strategy is kept under regular review. The vast majority of the council's investments are absolutely asset-backed. I don't know if members noticed the diagram at the background. In terms of value of the council's asset base, what it has on its balance sheet currently, and obviously about the income that it generates. So we often talk around the income to the council. This year's projected net income, which goes straight into the revenue budget, is £25.5 million. And as I look at in terms of the accounts, which are going to be prepared at the year end, the council currently has around £1.5 billion of assets, as set against a total borrowing of £0.84 billion. So clearly the council is in a very strong position. It's invested prudently and wisely in strong assets, particularly those around property. I take the point in regard to investment in Together Energy, that was around share capital. We've also obviously made similar investment in share capital in Redwood Bank. I would say that those are absolutely a minority in the council's overall investment strategy. They met very, very specific policy objectives in terms of supporting local businesses and our local economy in the case of the bank. And obviously the points that I raised to Councillor Buckley in terms of Together Energy and some of that social value. I would say that they're a very minor part of our investment strategy. I don't see a change to our focus, which has been around really strong performing property assets with long-term leases with very strong covenants. That would be the absolute bedrock of what we've done. But equally, as you can see from that, if your eyesight's really good, you have to have a telescope. We've also done a lot around commercial loans to local businesses, but also principally to registered social landlords. That's all asset-backed against housing stock, etc. So what you see is, in terms of a comprehensive view of the investment strategy, is a portfolio that's worth getting on for twice what we paid for it in terms of capital borrowings, but it's also driving net income. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that we've had to borrow that money. So when people talk about yield, they have to recognise that we have to borrow that money, clear the cost of borrowing, and then generate income on top of that. That's exactly what we've been doing. And that's contrary, really, to some of the stuff that I've heard. Councillor Chapman on the opposition, who thinks that we should go and invest in real estate in China because you get a far better yield. I don't think that's really in the interest of the people wanting to absolutely stand by.
Second resolution, to want to speak.
Councillor Critchley, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Probably a good opportunity to get back to the focus of this meeting on the tour of economics that the leader gave us. I and many others have very serious concerns regarding the due diligence processes and decision-making that took place when the council invested in Together Energy. This is public money that is being invested. Warrington Borough Council is not set up to be a hedge fund or a high-risk venture capital organisation. The council exists to provide services to the people of Warrington, not to speculate with public money. And I quote from the paper that went to the Cabinet in September 2019, "Together is seen as a minimum to long-term play for the council. The word play says it all." In less than 2.5 years of the play, an initial investment of 18 million in preference shares and an accompanying 4 million credit facility had grown to a potential exposure, according to the Deputy Leader, of £52 million. The eventual exposure is now to be determined by the administrator and the creditors of the company. This was an investment in a small energy trading company with virtually no tangible assets, a direct investment in share capital in a market which had many similar, aggressively competing companies. This should have been a major red flag for those considering this investment of public money in such an organisation. This was an investment investment in a small energy trading company based in Glasgow. This out-of-area investment should have been a major red flag for those considering this investment of Warrington's public money. When the investment was presented to the September 2019 Cabinet meeting, the statutory accounts of Together Energy for the year ending 31st of August 2018 had recently been filed. These accounts contained the following statement from the auditor. The company and the group, this is about Together Energy, the company and the group must both meet its cash flow projections and secure the continued support of the wholesale trading partner, which in turn is dependent upon its ability to obtain additional funding in order to continue as a going concern. In other words, without a substantial injection of cash, this company was insolvent when you bought into it, and Warrington Borough Council stepped up with the money. The auditor's statement should have been another enormous red flag for those considering this investment, not even mentioned in the Part 1 papers. It has been reported that senior officers of the council recommended not to proceed with this investment. I'll say that again, senior officers of the council recommended not to proceed. Why was this advice disregarded? Who knew? Did the cabinet know? Did the members know? This should have been another major red flag. The investment was being made in a trading company buying energy on the wholesale market and selling it on to retail customers. These trading companies rely heavily on brand credibility, but as the Times recently recorded, with a Trustpilot rating of just over 2 out of 5, even for councillors with no understanding of business, this was something anyone could understand. This should have been another major red flag for our decision makers. Other local authorities had already run into difficulties with their own energy trading investment companies. This doesn't even get a mention in the Part 1 Cabinet papers. It should have been another major red flag. Let me quote again from the Times. By the time Warrington pressed the button on the deal, 13 other suppliers had gone bust. It was plain that the easy money dozens of new entrants to this industry were hoping to make was not going to be easy at all. Yet our decision makers pressed ahead. Did the original plan envisage the council becoming the sole supplier of finance and guarantees? What due diligence and alternative scenario forecasting was done before the council found itself in the position of providing more finance and guaranteeing the indebtedness of Together Energy? There should have been serious red flags at the moment the company continued to ask for more and more public money from Warrington Borough Council. But instead, our decision makers were happy to delegate authority to officers to continue to pour money into the loss-making company. What due diligence was undertaken before the council supported the Bristol Energy retail customer purchase for 14 million? Together Energy was a loss-making company with problematic systems. It should have been one of the least favourite candidates to acquire another business, the consequence of which, even for a well-run profitable business, can be a very difficult period of integration. The risk of acquisition integration should have been a major red flag for our decision makers. The gross failures of due diligence and decision making must be exposed by an independent report into this debacle. Never again should this Labour Council play with public money as they did with Together Energy. I recommend support for this motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We all need to accept that our investment in Together Energy has been an embarrassing disaster for Warrington. It's so bad that I think we find ourselves joined here tonight by national news organisations as well as our local media. Frankly, Warrington's been let down by its council. There simply must be an inquiry. The sums involved are too large to sweep under the carpet or kick into the long grass. Nottingham and Bristol City Councils were the first councils to invest in energy companies in 2015. Subsequently, both have held inquiries after losing large amounts of their residents' money. Warrington Borough Council came along later, and even though we could have seen these councils losing millions of pounds, we still decided to invest in Together Energy. Through this company, we went on to fund the takeover of Bristol Energy as Bristol City Council escaped. There is a saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. I'm grateful for the list of background papers in the agenda, and it is a helpful start for an inquiry. However, there's more to do, starting with answering the 42 questions we asked Councillor Mitchell in writing on the 24th of January. From the background papers, some of the more recent references are still etched into my own memory. For example, I was present as an observer at the meeting of Cabinet held on the 8th of November 2021. One of the many meetings which discussed our investment in Together Energy. I observed a collective denial of the situation, a sort of group optimism bias, you might say, which has been picked up by others. One Cabinet Minister said, "Every single investment we have made goes through due diligence. It goes through the eye of an eagle. You would never make an unsafe investment. Everyone in the room and beyond has the opportunity to make comments and has done. We do not do things on the nod. We challenge every question that comes forward. We do not take lightly. I am absolutely behind every investment." This was representative of the messages at the time, and it was said with such confidence that I was almost convinced. But I couldn't help wondering how this due diligence had been passed through the eye of an eagle. Perhaps it had been transmitted like a telegram, using Morse code and printed onto a piece of cotton. From what I was hearing, it must have said something like this: "Together Energy is doing very well. Stop. No need to worry. Hedges in place. Stop. Low risk. Stop. Please send more money. Stop." At the same meeting, it was reported that officers were meeting 2 or 3 times a week to discuss Together Energy. Now we know that an inquiry will take up officers' time, and officers also have accounts to run. This is an unfortunate consequence of getting into a terrible mess. But at least officers are not still busy in meetings trying to rescue a basket case investment. I want to stress that we need to start the inquiry quickly so we can learn lessons. Subsequently, we can check whether there are any similar issues with other investments, because we can't.
We have had a valid amendment from Councillor Barn as proposer and Councillor Marks as second. Councillor Barn, please propose, and Councillor Marks, please second.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the amendment and I'll speak to it immediately. We wish to add to the beginning of the motion that when the administrators of Together Energy have provided initial findings and an indication of the allocation of the company's resources, then the wording is, as with the motion, Council resolves to commission an independent open inquiry into the circumstances associated with the Council's investment in Together Energy. And the reason for this is straightforward, basic fairness, and also fairness for the people of Warrington. It is quite wrong to start an inquiry, start a witch hunt, and throw around the sort of material that Councillor Critchley and Councillor Balding are throwing around prior to knowing what the situation actually is and what the administrators have said. If you change this into a fair motion, you can have our support. But as it is, it's an unfair motion, it's a lynch mob. And if you want to behave like a lynch mob, you're on your own.
Thank you, Councillor Marks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I rise to second. I think it's fairly well known that Nottingham, Bristol and Portsmouth have all had bad experiences investing in energy companies. Now, I understand that Nottingham lost around 30 million, Bristol 20 million and Portsmouth 3.5 million. But I also understand that we, Warrington Council, were in an advanced stage of buying Victory Energy at Portsmouth, but the company was closed down before it took on any customers. Now, I'm always told, we've heard it again tonight, that Together was different because we were buying the expertise rather than thinking our own staff could run an energy company. Now, I do accept this has some validity, but I said it before, I'll say it again. We have never believed right from the start that the risk was worthwhile. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the Portsmouth venture. This resulted from a cross-party agreement by Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats. But let me tell you that the original initiative to invest in an energy company came from none other than the Conservatives. And the decision to close the company came from the Liberal Democrats when they regained control of the council. And rather interestingly, the Liberal Democrats actually received a communication from the Taxpayers Alliance congratulating them on closing down a Tory scheme. Now, Johnson tells us to wait for the Sue Graham police report before passing judgment on his behaviour. This same principle should be applied to Together Energy. Acting now is premature. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marks. Do any other members wish to speak to the amendment? Yes? Councillor Gowland, please.
I speak to the amendments, and I address my really to the Labour colleagues on the side. Warrington is concerned about the investments, and we need an investigation. We need an open investigation. It needs to be fairly wide-ranging, and as my colleague said, it needs to be a fair investigation. We're not after a lynch mob, we're after a full review of what happened. I don't think we're going to find a mafia-run company of disrepute. I think what we're going to find is that there may be some mistakes there. There could have been some more communication between interested parties. I appreciate it about 2 minutes, but actually how open were those people who would be interested and have a justifiable reason to see that. So I commend our amendment to the motion. Now, I do know that Councillor Bowden is always keen to take a decision based on a motion that we put forward. He'll say, well, we'll make a decision if it's the best way forward. But actually, this is what the people of Warrington are asking for. It's not just me in Link South, it's not just my colleagues here. It is what Warrington is after. So I would say, accept our amended motion. I think it's a fair one. I think it gives an open approach to what Warrington will be asking for. And it takes away some of the hysteria. We're not a lynch mob, that's not what we're after. What we do want to have is the facts. So I commend this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, please. Oh, Councillor. Yes.
Yeah, it's just a point of order, really. We take exception to Councillor Barr's remarks that we are a lynch mob, and I ask him to retract that statement, please.
I will retract that statement, but my further statements will depend on the way that you behave, and the way that your behaviour is voted is reprehensible.
Councillor, please.
That a retraction?
I retract the term lynch mob, I replace it with the term reprehensible.
Councillor Buckley, please. No? Councillor Dixon, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking on behalf of our whole group, and I would like to urge the Council to reject this amendment. I completely understand why Councillor Barr and Councillor Marks would want to put it forward, precisely because it softens the sense of urgency that really needs to be happening in getting to the bottom of the processes that took place before this investment was made. It's no surprise to me and to our group that the Liberal Democrats have put this forward, because of course you were the opposition at the time, and it was your responsibility to be asking these types of awkward questions that we are asking tonight, and indeed have been asking throughout the last 7 or 8 months. I think it's absurd completely to suggest we're acting like a lynch mob. What we're doing, and I think we're doing rather effectively, is asking awkward questions and fulfilling our constitutional responsibility to the people of Warrington and this council. I agree completely with Councillor Gowland that actually this is what the people of Warrington want. You try and band-aid, plaster over the failure of the investment by calling it circumstances in your amendment. Whichever way you try and slice this, whether it's 52 million lost, 30 million lost, 20 million lost, or even 10 million lost, this has been a significant financial failure. And by asking this question and putting the motion in the way we have, we want to shine a light on it faster. Other investments may equally be at risk. It's not about preempting the administrator's review. It's not about trying to talk down Warrington. It's not about trying to damage our possibility of recovering as much as we possibly can, because that is what our group wants, and we are in complete agreement with everyone on that. This is about making sure our processes are secure. It's about getting to the bottom quickly of how those processes are made, especially the relationship that took place between the leadership of the council. We heard earlier Councillor Bowden talking about how the recommendation came from senior officers, what went on, what was said. This is a matter of urgency because it affects all the people of Warrington. So I would urge the council to reject the proposed amendment because it's just not got enough teeth. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yes. Councillor Critchley, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep this brief. Councillor Dixon has really made the key points. The problem with this amendment is it attempts to kick the investigation to the long grass. There is a failed process here. A process of a failure of due diligence, a failure of corporate governance, and a failure of decision making. I do not want this council to be exposed to those failures. There's a requirement for an urgent and open investigation. And as far as I'm concerned, there are two stages. There's the administration process and the resulting whatever the loss is. But right now, we have a huge issue potentially with the processes of this council and the corporate governance and decision making and the way due diligence is operating. And we, as councillors, need to know what is going on. So we need that report now, and I reject the motion because it effectively pushes the issue into the long grass and doesn't deal with the issue now. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we now vote on the amendment, please? All those in favour? All those against? And abstentions, please. The amendment? Yes. The amendment is defeated. I'm sorry. The motion. And Councillor May, yes. Members, we will discuss the original motion. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to talk briefly about transparency and democracy in local government, or more so, sometimes the lack of it, what we're seeing at the moment in Warrington. It is fair to say that since the Conservative group formed the opposition in May 2021, it has been asking challenging questions about investments, both in the Chamber and at committee level as well. However, our questions have been met with contempt and inadequate answers from the Labour leadership group. It now apparently transpires that, in fact, Councillor Bowden was cautioned about Together Energy investment by an officer. The advice given was not to make the investment. Yes, officers advise and members decide. But how did they still reach the decision that to invest funds put into the trust by the taxpayers of Warrington against this advice? The level of scrutiny required and expertise in energy markets are just not present within the council. The Labour leadership team will no doubt continue to hide behind the austerity comfort blanket for the bad decisions that have been made. However, maybe they could explain why, compared to other local Labour councils such as Wigan, we find ourselves in Warrington in £1.65 billion worth of debt. Wigan also managed not to raise their council tax by almost 5%, helping their hard-working families in their town to keep their cash. Members, the game is up. The party is over for the leader. Back our motions this evening and let others from your party take the reins. You may not want to back our motions in public, but Labour colleagues, it's time for you to take back control of your party and elect a new leader and deputy behind the closed doors as a matter of urgency. Stop this paralysis of Warrington. Let us start a new chapter of openness and a willingness
to treat serious issues in a serious way and not simply resort to political point scoring. Now, to turn to the motion itself, I have spoken before on the need for greater transparency and openness, not as a weapon for political point scoring, but to ensure our council is not only acting in the best interest of the people of Warrington, but that the people of Warrington can have trust in their council's actions. It is vital that we learn any lessons there are to learn from our investment in Together Energy. And whilst my group disagree with the exact timing it mentions in the motion, we nevertheless support it, and we hope it can receive the cross-party support it needs to move the council forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Lamond, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Councillor Critchard that there are significant areas of concern with this investment. Indeed, I would like to learn the processes in place and the justification for proceeding on said investment after 13 similar companies had already folded. It is disappointing to see that this motion is just to focus on the failures associated with this investment in Together Energy and not the investment as a whole. As Councillor Barr suggested, it could be seen reprehensible. Despite this, however, I support this motion as the matter is important to our town and we need to learn lessons from it. I would hope that the members to my right also overlook this and support this motion. The terms of reference can and should include all findings, including what we did as a council well. Party politics aside, would help in this investment strategy, which the leaders spoke passionately about, to prevent another Together Energy or Bedford. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lamond. Councillor Burton, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I made the point earlier about tonight's meeting, whether indeed it could be considered urgent business. And this motion does exactly, or gives me exactly the same problem. Inquiries by their very nature are not urgent. Inquiries happen when the true facts are known. You look at some of the big disasters that happen, it can take years, even decades, to get a decision made about an inquiry. So the point is, if there's going to be an investigation or an inquiry, then that needs to be commissioned when the facts are known. I've already mentioned the LGA peer review less than 2 years ago. I've already mentioned the review that was done by PricewaterhouseCoopers regarding our risk assessment approach and also our governance processes. And I also mentioned that we didn't wait for tonight on the back of what's happened with the unfortunate demise of Together.
And to provide the supplier guarantee. How about this one? Industry experts will form the majority of the board. Industry experts, who are 2 board members for virtually the whole of the period of council's investment. One was our own chief executive, and the other was Paul Richards, the other shareholder and chief executive of Together Energy. In fact, no other industry experts were appointed to the board. The paper made no mention of the ongoing losses of Together Energy, no mention in the paper to Cabinet of the accumulated losses in Robin Hood Energy or Bristol Energy, the details of which were freely available in statutory accounts of those companies. In fact, at 5.2 it stated, many other local councils are considering establishing their own energy supply companies. It's almost as though there was a Klondike and Warrington had to invest quickly or else they'd miss out. Where was the balance in this report, and where was the exposure of the risks? There was no mention of the company's poor ranking in the Witch reports or the Trustpilot rating, no mention of the nature of Together Energy as a small asset-less trading company in a highly competitive market. It made no mention of the risks for Warrington Borough Council will become the sole supplier of finance and guarantees by finding itself in the position of lender of last resort to a loss-making company. As the Times reported, Take Warrington Borough Council, which in September 2019 came up with the wheeze of buying a half share in a Scotland-based energy supplier. A wheeze, a clever and amusing scheme, idea or trick, as though investment is easy. It was public money that was being played with. A glance at the previous accounts would have sent alarm bells ringing and stopped this investment. Instead, everything in the garden was rosy, and in 2.5 years later we have this mess. Only a fool does not learn from their mistakes. We need to understand clearly the failures that took place so that such a fiasco cannot happen again. Do not allow this council to be taken for fools. I again commend this motion to the council. Thank you.
Please take the vote. If you respond for, please. For. Against. Sorry, all those in favour. Again. For. Sorry, I'm taking it again. Can I just take it again? For. Against. Abstentions. Motion is defeated. Motion 2. Councillor Critchley, please propose. Councillor Golding, please second.
I move to propose motion 2 and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Golding, do you wish to speak?
I'd like to second this motion and I reserve the right to speak.
Councillor Critchley, I'd like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's time to grasp the enormity of what's just happened and its implications for the Council's high-risk, high-debt, low-return strategy. Together Energy enters administration, and what does the Cabinet do but agree another investment, this time for £37.5 million of loans to a small, out-of-area, for-profit housing company? Where was the pause for reflection? The failure of Together Energy can be laid, in my opinion, at the failure of due diligence, a failure of decision-making, and a failure of corporate governance. A corporate governance failure that allowed the chief executive of the council to be the council's sole director representative on the board of Together Energy for over 2 years, when the council had the ability to appoint 2 suitably qualified persons to the board to oversee this investment. And a corporate governance failure, in my opinion, that led to repeated surprises coming from Together Energy, which contributed to the knee-jerk additional funding. It simply isn't credible to press on with the same investment strategy as though nothing is happening. It's worth reminding ourselves what our external auditors had to say in papers presented to the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. Not all authorities exercise appropriate care with public money. Not all authorities exercise appropriate governance, and not all authorities have the capability of managing risk, both short and long term. Optimism bias has been baked into too many councils' medium-term plans. That just about sums up Warrington Borough Council. This is public money. I'll say it again. It's public money, not private investment. The council is not a hedge fund. The council's debt levels are already astonishingly high. Its gearing levels way beyond those that are considered reasonable or prudent. Let's remind ourselves that external auditors now have to be satisfied if the council has made proper arrangements for securing economy, efficiency, effectiveness in the use of its resources. In relation to governance, the questions the external auditor has to answer is the council making informed decisions supported by appropriate evidence and allowing for challenge and transparency? Allowing for challenge and transparency, well, that is a very difficult concept for some members of this council. Let's consider what has happened. Together Energy has entered administration with potentially millions of public money at risk. The investment in Redwood Bank has been impaired by between 15 and 16 million. Why? because the latest valuation says it's no longer worth, it's only worth half the 32 million invested by the council. More public money at risk. Effective use of resources, I ask you. And the council has been forced to adopt a prudent approach to MRP provisioning after being in conflict with the external auditor, who had to resort to threatening the council with using statutory powers and the issuing of a public interest report for the council finally to see sense. The impact of adopting a prudent MRP policy is that potentially many of the council's property investments, including Birchwood Park, will now make lower potential negative returns for the council. If Birchwood Park had a straight line MRP provision applied to it, the $5 million a year MRP charge would remove the $5 million return the Chief Executive referred to in his interview with Warrington Worldwide. The whole investment strategy has led us to this position where the council has borrowed in excess of 12 times usable reserves, needs a root and branch review in the light of the failure of Together Energy. The impairment of Redwood Bank and the huge question that the adoption of prudent MRP provisioning raises for much of the council's property portfolio is simply not tenable or credible to continue as though nothing has happened. The motion before you calls for a change in the investment strategy in the light of the lessons learnt from its investment in Together Energy. And until the revised strategy has been agreed for the powers of the Cabinet in terms of non-treasury investment to be curtailed to the extent that if any investment greater than $5 million is being considered, that investment must be agreed by full council. This would allow for far more effective decision-making involving all opinions and views on risk to be listened to before any investment is contemplated. Today, in my opinion, we have an echo chamber that simply reinforces the optimism bias of the council. And then we have the ridiculous situation where, despite having the ability to appoint people who actually understood the energy market, or maybe had a deep financial knowledge of private business, the council left the chief executive as the sole representative of the board of Together Energy. This decision beggars belief. It's now time that all board positions available to the council are filled as soon as possible by suitably qualified persons. I commend this motion to the council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If you read last year's investment strategy documents for Warrington Borough Council, you can see that they're full of detail. But they clearly don't work. They lack common sense, and this council needs to go back to basics. Arguably, the most successful investor in history is a man called Warren Buffett. And he will tell you that the first rule of investing is don't lose money. He also says the second rule of investing is to never forget the first rule. Unfortunately, our current investment strategy doesn't have this philosophy at its heart. In practice, it's not always possible to follow Buffett's first rule, but it illustrates the mindset required for successful investing. If you are losing money, then you need to know when to pull the plug. Our record so far shows that we don't even know how to turn off the taps. It's interesting to read the reviews made by Grant Thornton into the historic failures of Bristol Energy and Robin Hood Energy. The reviews are full of recommendations for following a set of procedures and strategies, but basically it's box ticking. Box ticking may be appropriate for most council strategies, where they opt for a lower risk, but it will not work for Warrington with its high risk appetite and record of investing in start-up companies outside our borough and outside our area of expertise. We are investing in companies who often have little existing capital to minimise our risk. We are selecting investments that claim to provide some sort of social benefit anywhere in the UK. This strategy may be well-intentioned, but we are first and foremost a council. Social good is our main function. We have over 200,000 people to look after, with a full range of needs, so our investments should put the interests of our residents first. As it happens, there's a great example of an investment in Warrington which would have a meaningful financial and social benefit, all for about £2 million. But somehow, for many, many years, we've avoided making this investment. It's called a traveller's transit site. Rather than adopt Buffett's first rule, we seem to have made meeting council policy objectives, our first rule of investment. But the opportunities we find often don't fit. We go along trying to hammer square pegs into round holes, ending up with a broken toy and splinters. For example, we found an energy trading company called Together Energy, which was claimed to meet our policy objectives on climate change. Even if this was not just greenwashing, which it was, any strategy that is for good public relations that loses Warrington millions of pounds is just wrong. Of course, we don't want to make investments which would damage our reputation, but what damages our reputation even more is being reckless. Another part of this flawed strategy that needs looking at is the oft-reported risk workshops. I imagine that these are a bit like Dragon's Den on the BBC. Entrepreneurs, and it would be fascinating to see the potential investments pitched by entrepreneurs to cabinet members and officers. But we need to consider whether these types of risk investments and their sales pitches should be to capital specialists like the real dragons or investment companies. There are plenty of safer investments to choose from should we need them. So where do we go from here? Effectively, this motion is suspending decisions to make large investments made by Cabinet, which is the current strategy. It's an important break to put on. It shows how seriously we take this matter and how we resolve to change.
Thank you. That's good. We have had a draft amendment from Councillor Barr as proposer and Councillor Marks as seconder. Councillor Barr, please propose.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll speak to the amendment. I will do my best to moderate my language given the earlier circumstances. The amendment here is a very modest one, and it's one I hope for once that the official opposition might be able to accept. Again, we don't like the word change because that prejudges the situation, so we want the moderator to review. A review obviously implies change if it is necessary, but it doesn't prejudge what changes are necessary. Secondly, we like the idea of full council approval for loans over £500,000, but these are investments and these are things that last longer than a single administration. They last more than a 4-year term. I don't think that the elective dictatorship that's run by a very dominant leader is right to make those decisions on a majority of one. I just do not think that's right. The leader will tell us, go out and win more seats. I suspect we will go out and win more seats if you want to change that. However, if we want to reduce risk, if we want to be more inclusive about the way decision-making is made, if we're serious about openness, about transparency, about proper scrutiny, and about reducing centralisation of decision-making in effectively one person, then we will support this motion. So I hope that everyone will accept changing the word change to review and then asking for 2/3 majority for such major investments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Marks, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I rise to second this amendment. Now, there are questions to answer about the Council investment strategy, which is why we support a review. Now, we are pleased that active steps are now being taken to recruit independent members of the ACG, which is something we've been requesting for a while. Now, our amendment also, as Councillor Barr says, requires greater consensus from the Council before decisions on major investments are made. But let's just spend a few minutes just talking at the Conservative record on finance. Now, many of you will have heard about Spellthorne Council in Surrey. This was run by Conservatives and was criticised for serious failures on property investment due to lack of transparency, financial reporting and accountability. The Tory leader there was actually ousted, and the council is now run by a Liberal Democrat leader who is making the necessary changes to correct the mistakes of the past. Now, I trust also that the Conservatives are equally concerned about the financial problems of their own government. Now, just recently, it was in the news a few days ago, it has been referred to earlier, it was criticised for wasting billions of pounds on PPE, and there were court rulings against it for lack of transparency over the purchase of masks, gowns, gloves and services. £17 billion was paid to suppliers without competitive tender or to pre-approved suppliers who may not have had pre-approval for the actual items purchased. And there was also the illegal VIP fast track for programs. Now the Tories complain about this council's high debt. Yes, it is high. Do they equally complain about the national debt, which is at its highest level since the early 60s? If they don't, they are guilty of hypocrisy. And we've heard it again tonight, they always take the side of the external auditor rather than the council, and their comments amount to an attack on our officers, which we don't like at all. We agree that the reputation of the council has suffered because our 17-18 accounts have not been signed off, and I have said this on many occasions. But it is worth pointing out that there is a serious national problem with external audits, largely caused by government decisions. 91% of councils missed the statutory deadline for completing audits last year. The MJ Journal described it as a perfect storm, and they specifically referenced Grant Thornton in the article. Audit work has become more complex due to commercial investments, staff shortages, decreased audit fees, a decade of austerity, and COVID. And interestingly, the Institute of Chartered Accountants contrasted a £500,000 audit fee for a company called Premier Foods with £159,000 for Manchester City Council, even though the council had double the revenue. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Do any other members wish to speak on the amendment, please? No. Yes, Councillor Dixon, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Barr and Councillor Marks for this amendment. I don't know whether Councillor Marks has entered some sort of alternative reality tonight. Normally, I find his comments extremely edifying and to the point, but we seem to be having an awful lot of deflection to do with Downing Street, to do with debt, national debt records. I, for one, am proud as a Conservative that this government stepped up to the plate and poured millions into supporting businesses, homeowners, especially here in Warrington. Over 20 million at least was given. I'm proud of that record, and I think it was the right thing to do given the extraordinary circumstances we faced of a global pandemic. Similarly, I don't know why he keeps going on about Slough Council or Portsmouth, because we're here to deal with Warrington and the issues that are at stake here. I am not familiar with the individual circumstances there. Obviously, he's got plenty of time on his hands to be investigating that, rather than maybe scrutinising Labour, who are the government here. In terms of the motion, I actually think the sentiments are very good, and our group more or less supports them. The issue is more of a technical one for us, which is to do with, and it's been touched upon by the Dems themselves in their speeches, which is it might become too difficult for any majority group to actually make effective decisions if there's such a high threshold of a two-thirds majority. We're calling for extra safeguards to be introduced, regardless of who has that majority, in order to try and minimise the risk. But we think that your proposals would just go too far and risk paralysis in the effective government of a unitary authority, which Warrington is. Also, as was touched upon, it is actually ultimately a question of a democratic mandate. We accept that Labour are the government. They accept that they carry the can for the decisions that they take. Our job, as mentioned earlier, is to scrutinise them. It is actually our job also to go out, persuade the public and win more seats. And so introducing a two-thirds majority would lead to, we think, smaller parties, those who never get anywhere near government, simply becoming kingmakers and having an undue influence over the democratic mandates that's been given. Of course, Labour have that mandate at the minute. It remains to be seen whether they'll have it, obviously, at the next election. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Can we now vote on the amendment, please? Back to Councillor Pritchard. Councillor Wade first, please, then Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the avoidance of any accusations of deflection or doubt, I'll return to my comments in my first speech. It's essential that people of Warrington have trust in their council. And our investment strategy is quite rightly a matter of not just public interest, but at the moment public concern. Now, the people of Warrington, of course, elect 58 councillors, and I'm sure that voters would appreciate that their councillors, regardless of party or status, be properly informed and empowered over decision-making as important as our investment strategy. I don't consider that to currently be the case, and I think that this motion, especially if amended, would empower all councillors and go some way to restoring public trust in this council. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor McLaughlin, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to make a comment on a single point raised by Councillor Barr and advise that if he wishes to gain support for his amendments in council meetings, he would do well to refrain from debasing the work of this council by using the term elected dictatorship. It damages faith in the electoral process and in political engagement, and this is something Councillor...
In terms of customer satisfaction, and that is overall 48% customer satisfaction level. Now coming back to the second point, which I actually raised initially at one of our meetings quite a few months ago with Councillor Patel, telling him that why don't you invest on long-term basis in overseas markets, especially in the Far East. And I was telling him from my own personal experience, because I buy and sell shares almost regularly on behalf of my company, and let me tell you, my returns are over 100%. So if anybody wants to invest in my company, you're very welcome to do that, including Warrington Borough Council. Okay? So that's why I was advising him to invest there, make a quick buck, get out, and then reinvest in Warrington for the benefit of the Warrington public, because you want to make money. So why are you looking at a market which is losing money? Go out and make more money and come back. So that was my logic behind it. But I think it's been slightly twisted and made me look like a fool, and I don't know what I was talking. So that's that. Now, let me give you one more thing here. Is it not correct that in August 2018, the year-end financial report, which was presented about Together Energy, according to that report, the auditors, they warned that this company is showing material uncertainty. Now, that is prior to Warrington Borough Council taking out 50% stake in Together Energy. Assuming WBC was aware of this material uncertainty, may I see the due diligence that they're talking about? Where is that report? Where is the risk assessment report? May I see it? I hear that you've done it, but I haven't seen it. I think our leader will be very kind enough to proudly distribute it to everyone and say, look, here it is. So I look forward to that from the leader of the opposition, of Labour Party, basically, not opposition. Right, and I think I just rest my points here, and I urge you to support our motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say a few words this evening because we've heard, the council has taken an approach to making investments that will generate revenue, go back into providing services for our residents. But also, they've been made for strategic reasons as well. As Chair of Warrington's Climate Emergency Commission, I can categorically state that this approach has been absolutely critical to enabling us to work towards our net zero goals. Together Energy was a clear part of that strategic approach, sadly not there any longer, but it was a company in which a show sought to help bring the town's own in-house generated electricity to the residents of Warrington, to bring it to them at lower cost, to work with them to make their properties more efficient, especially for those in deprived areas, and with the price of energy going up the way it is doing at the moment, that was clearly a very important thing, hopefully, to be able to do. It was part, though, of an overall strategy to help achieve the Council's net zero target, even before the climate emergency was declared. This target would be absolutely impossible to achieve without all the investments that the Council has made. To illustrate some of those, the Council's 1.6 million of investments includes a total of 72 million, which was spent on the game-changing solar farms in York and Hull, as well as Plastic Omnium in Warrington itself. The York solar farm generates 34.7 megawatts and is backed up by 30 megawatts of battery storage, and Hull has a capacity of 25.7. It uses very sophisticated technology on the battery storage to maximise income. These investments have generated electricity well in excess of what was expected in their first year, and they're expected to generate more than £100 million over the lifetime of the farms in net profit, which will go back into providing resident services. As well as that, the initial investment of 40 million after just 12 months is estimated to be worth 55 million. That's over 30% increase in value. They've generated more than 5 million in EBITDA already, and Warrington has been a UK leader in this area, and many other councils have looked to follow our example. The electricity generated from Hull powers all the street lights in Warrington, themselves an investment which wouldn't have been possible without loans and income from other investments, and is helping to reduce our electricity bills here in Warrington. The new 22 megawatt farm in Cirencester, which is coming online in March, will power our new electric bus fleet from 2023. Again, financed in significant part by the Council, along with the new bus depot, without which the new buses would be unable to operate. Once in operation, we'll have a zero emissions fleet, and fuel costs will plummet. In reality, there'll be nothing, practically nothing, because it's all electricity we generate ourselves. That will make buses cheaper to operate, and for the first time in years, will present us with an opportunity to reduce fares and to increase services. Income from the solar farms and Together Energy have enabled Warrington Community Energy to be set up to facilitate the installation of solar panels on public buildings and to install insulation to reduce heating requirements, again benefiting residents. Add to this the investment that's been put into other areas such as active travel networks, including cycle routes and pedestrianisation. It's been shown time after time that cuts in very many cases lead to increased costs. Cutting social care leads to increased hospital care at 5 times the cost. The alternative is to invest strategically and effectively so that additional benefits can be achieved, which can lead to reduced costs. This is very clearly the case with our climate emergency plans. The Tory plan to sell off everything would destroy our climate emergency plans at a stroke, and they purport to support those plans. Well, that is not too credible. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any of the members like to speak? Councillor Bowden, please try and switch up. And anybody else?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Marks made a really important point, and I don't think it reflects very well on the level of debate in this council when we get puerile commentary and blatant attacks on council officers. Council members have to be above attacking our officers, and it's unbecoming of them as individuals, as councillors, and with us collectively. What we've got with this motion is the transformation of the captains of industry into the captains of chaos. This motion is just designed to paralyse this council. And I don't know where the 5 million came from, but it betrays a total naivety about how local government works, about the depth and range of decisions that need to be made by the council collectively. And one of the things we've heard a lot about tonight is about decision making and whether that's right. Well, I know that officers of this council and politicians make hundreds of crucial decisions every day of the week, and some of those impact directly on people's lives. That's not to say that, council as officers individually or council collectively or the cabinet always gets everything right. The one thing I can guarantee is everybody has the right motives, and I think it's quite disappointing that we've got an opposition that again want to resort to hysterical language to talk about the way that the council operates. I look at opportunities that come our way. We talked a lot about Together Energy. I'm grateful to Councillor Eva for his questions around investment strategy. When you look at the council's investment strategy, a lot of that is around property. But there's also a lot of commercial loan activity to registered social landlords, for example. And look at the direct impact that has here in Warrington in terms of new homes being built, high quality homes through partners, but also now through our own housing company. And the notion that somehow every decision that comes forward that can be part of the council's budget has to come back to council for a further step for approval is naive and extreme. Often opportunities come up, some of those are highly commercial in nature, and we do offer support to local businesses and to partners here in the town. That drives the economy, it drives regeneration, it drives growth and it drives jobs. And I know that there are a great number of partners who would not be engaging with the council with the kind of protracted process of paralysis that's set out here. It's almost a step back to a committee system, where, again, people are paralysed by discussion and very little decision-making gets done. The other point, which kind of seems to have passed everybody by, and we talk about openness and transparency. The investment strategy that the council has adopted, driven by the absolute need to generate income and to preserve services to this council, is predicated exactly on confidentiality and dealing in a mature way with other people's information. And that's the reason why quite often Cabinet has to take items as part to business, because we need to protect the interests of the council and other people. And that is a change. I look back more than 10 years ago, councils weren't doing this kind of activity. So part 2 business was like kind of an absolute rarity, really. I can't imagine any partner in this town going through a process whereby they have to expose that confidential data, commercial data, to full council. This council will be sitting in part 2, on a regular basis, and then waiting for that decision to go through Cabinet as the executive that makes the decision. Clearly, tonight, what we've got is a total misunderstanding of how a council operates and how it makes decisions. It's not about urgency. A lot of what we're doing just simply wouldn't happen, and that would be passing up opportunities to realise significant income to the council, but also to support everyone in delivering the absolute best for Warrington. It is naive. I would have thought the opposition would have taken a bit of time to get their feet under the table and work out, exactly how a council operates. This is just intent to tie the hands of this administration, and on that basis, it simply can't be supported.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points that have been raised in the debate. Councillor Baldwin talked about Warren Buffett. And everyone knows Warren Buffett is famous for his investments and his profits of his portfolio. But he does make mistakes. In 2008, he had a £23 billion loss. A couple of years ago, he reported an £11 billion loss. But he's still a good investor because he has a balanced portfolio. And that's what we have. I said it in the first debate. We have a balanced portfolio that is generating us a net surplus, something that again has not been acknowledged by the opposition. Coming to the points that Councillor Chapman made about investing in China and investing in her company. I'll be honest, I don't think it was me that you raised it with, but I did hear about that conversation. We do reject unsafe investments, and that is why we rejected the idea of investing in China, as per Councillor Chapman's comments in the meeting, and as she's publicly said here today, why don't you just invest in her company? That's not a safe way to invest public taxpayers' money. We talk about the negatives of our council strategy, but again, you won't hear the Tories talk about some of the positives. So if you look at our council papers, we're proposing investing in a cycle route. We're proposing investing in Crappen Hall Road, a new performance arts building in Lynn. Walton Hall is getting more investment. We're getting a new bus depot, getting more investment in Victoria Park. I could go on and on and on. There's £60 million worth of investment in local projects that we're proposing next year. None of those will have a significant, if any, financial return. But I made the point in the last debate, sometimes you do things because it's the right thing to do. Now I'll sit down in a minute and Councillor Critchley will know how to respond. And Madam Mayor, you will say, Councillor Critchley, you have the right to reply. He didn't reply to any of the points that we made in the first debate. And I'd be interested to hear if he replies to the comments about whether we were right or wrong to reject the idea of investing in Councillor Chapman's company and investing in properties in China. Were we right? Were we wrong? I'd like to know your opinion on that. Secondly, I'd also like to know whether the Tories have actually sat down with the officers and asked them just how many investments have we rejected? How many investment opportunities have we rejected? Because actually, from my count, for every one that we have accepted, there have been numerous that we have rejected for both financial reasons, policy reasons, and actually for our politics. It wasn't the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hope I'll be brief, and the risk of sounding glib, I don't know about Councillor Dixon's comments about Councillor Marks being in an alternative dimension. I think we all passed into the twilight zone when we had our investment podcast from Councillor Chapman a couple of minutes ago. I'm really glad that Councillor Critchley agrees with me on the need to empower councillors regardless of status and have more power in full council. But I do appreciate Councillor Bowman's points about the need for nimble decision making. But what I would say, having listened to both sides of the discussion, is it is quite possible to have the best of intentions, but for the process to be wrong. And I would argue that if the process for decision making is wrong, or is not as good as it can be, then it is easier for mistakes to be made. And maybe the exact proposals before us tonight are not the right answer in the views of councillors across the parties. But I would say, and glad that Councillor Critchley agrees with this, we do need to empower this body, and we do need to empower all 58 councillors, because that is the best way to restore public trust in decisions and in this council's future. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bate. Councillor Critchley, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll respond first of all to Councillor Patel. No, I wouldn't be investing in China, and I definitely wouldn't recommend we put public money in Councillor Chapman's company. Full stops. Secondly, I think the leader actually misunderstood our motion. And of course, the restriction on investments over 5 million coming to council is only until the change strategy is in place. I completely, though, echo Councillor Bates' comments. You have a wealth of talent in this chamber, and at the moment, we are not being used effectively. The decision-making of this council would benefit from the proper input of the likes of those who have a financial background or a different opinion about risk to the way you are currently thinking in the Cabinet. Now, come on, I'll touch on a few more now. In my opinion, the investment of this strategy of this council cannot continue. I'm a financial professional of 35 years standing, and the level of financial risk that you are creating for the residents of Warrington is now eye-watering. The idea that it's possible just to continue to borrow and borrow and borrow with no regard for the balance sheet, I find that utterly bewildering. No regard for financial gearing. There's not a number in any of the reports that looks at your reserves against your borrowings. The basic measure of financial risk doesn't appear. As I say, I'm a financial professional of 35 years standing, and I have never in my life seen anything like this. The lack of information that members are given to understand what's really going on is frightening. There's 58 of us. We should know what is happening with these investments, the return on the investments and the risk of those investments, so we can help make the right decisions. Open and transparent, well, they're not the words I would choose to use. The idea that after a failure of the scale of Together Energy and the huge reputational damage it is causing for Warrington, the idea that the strategy can just continue without even a pause exposes, for me, the bunker mentality and groupthink that is taking, in my opinion, Warrington to the brink. In my opinion, the idea the Cabinet can continue unchecked without reference to full council simply reinforces the errors of the past. There has to be more debate with all members before public money is poured into questionable investments by the Cabinet. And as an aside, it's simply no longer acceptable that Part 2 papers are hidden away from council members with valid comments to make. The corporate governance failure of Together Energy is staggering. The council could have filled 2 positions on the board with people who understood finance and understood energy. Instead, we left the chief executive of the council on there for over 2 years. I really struggle with that decision. Together Energy needed the most careful scrutiny by people who fully understood what they were dealing with. It was public money at risk in a highly competitive market, with a company that had a dreadful track record of customer service, was loss-making and was causing significant reputational damage for the council. You can never again leave board positions unfilled when you have the chance to fill them. The motion asks for 3 simple things: a change in the investment strategy that this council is following in the light of the Together Energy investment failure, that the Cabinet cannot have unrestricted ability to invest without reference now to full council for anything over 5 million, and that all board positions available to the council are filled by the council with suitably qualified person. In my opinion, this is the minimum that needs to happen to try and stop future failures of the council's investments. And again, I commend this motion to the council. Thank you.
Can I please take a vote now? If you respond for 4. Abstentions? Very much. We now go on. Oh, I do apologise.